It's good to, again, just to be with you. If you've been with us the last 6 to 8 weeks, realistically, I think it's been 8 weeks that we've actually been in a series. 6 weeks of that was actually teaching. But we've been in a series dealing with Christian sexuality, and we finished 6 weeks of that, and the other 2 weeks was like a snow day and then spring break. And so we finished 6 weeks of that. There's 6 more weeks to go, and so I just wanted to pause just for a second and kind of stop that series just for a week, and then we'll pick it up next week. But just for a break to kind of process what we've been dealing with, and then to go back into another 6-week series of that, which will kind of be broken up. So today we're not talking about Christian sexuality, although I think that series has been just phenomenal for us. I wanted to pause on it, and today we're just going to be talking about just a passage of Scripture that we see in the Old Testament in Isaiah. So I want to read it, and then we'll get into it. But this is Isaiah, one of the major prophets, chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. And this is what Isaiah writes. He says, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory.' At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. 'Woe to me,' I cried, 'I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty.' Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And with it he touched my mouth and said, 'See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for.'" This is the word of the Lord. Some of y'all know this, but many of you probably don't. But my wife, Rainey, she was engaged to be married before she met me. And so when I actually heard about her and saw a picture of her in her dad's office and was like, "She's pretty, who's that?" Her dad was like, "Oh, that's my daughter. She's engaged to be married." And I was like, darn it, a little too late. So I was like, okay, so that's done. And she was engaged to be married to this guy. And I think she's fine with me sharing this story, but I guess we'll find out. I love you. Okay. But engaged to be married, and I dated this guy for a really, really long time, and it was one of those things where obviously they'd gone through the natural stages of relationship. She was in college at the time, and they were planning on, at the end of college, somewhere to get married and that kind of thing. And she had obviously made mistakes like anybody else had made mistakes inside of a relationship, and he had too. He had made some really substantial ones that my wife had forgiven him and just said, like, look, if we're going to do life together, if our relationship is supposed to be what Jesus is to us, that means that we're supposed to forgive each other even when it really, really hurts. And so offered him crazy forgiveness on certain things that he was dealing with in his own world and stuff. And then there came a time where she screwed up like everybody else does in a relationship, maybe more substantial than the normal, spats or whatever, normal fights. And it was his turn to forgive, because this is what you do inside of a covenant, or this is what you do inside of a relationship that's supposed to mimic a covenant in some ways. You're supposed to forgive. You're supposed to be like Jesus does and forgive. And he straight up didn't. He was like, and to my benefit, actually, I'm really thankful that he's a pagan. I don't know. But he did not forgive her, would not forgive her, took back the ring in this crazy moment of just anger, took back the ring and called off the engagement and the whole thing. And it was done in a day. And for her, she was just wrecked. Dreaming about being married and dating this guy for a number of years and just expecting it to go a certain way and knowing, I'm going to mess up and he's going to mess up, but we're in this together and this is how we're going to repair this and we'll fix it. And she had practiced forgiveness towards him, but he was not willing to do that for her. And in a moment where she was like, I'm expecting the same love that I've given you, I'm expecting that back, she didn't receive it. And so went through a season of depression. Again, this is all before I ever met her, but went through a season of depression of just really some really, really difficult things that she was battling just about that relationship, because you're starting over now and you got to date again and do all those kinds of things. And so I meet her in the midst of that. And I wanted to date her when she was engaged to that dude. But so I when I found out that it was over and I still had a shot, I was like, Lord, send your servant to marry this girl. I'm ready, And she had wanted nothing to do with me. She barely knew I existed. And I thought she was just the best thing ever. And she was like, your name is Coleton, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, she might know my name. Like, this is great. And it was one of those things that we started getting together and started to hang out a little bit and that kind of thing. But from the get-go, she didn't say this. She has said this lately, but would never have said this then. But she just thought that I was exactly like him. Like I was going to be exactly like that other dude. That if she were to let herself fall in love with me, if she were to let us date in a way that I would basically get her to the verge of marriage, and then at the last minute she would do something wrong because everybody's sinful and screws up. And she just thought, I'm going to do that, and then he's going to do exactly what the other dude did to me. And so she just went into protection mode. Like, regardless of whatever I was able to show her, I'm like, look, I'm in this with you. I'm for you. I love you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to bail on you in this deal. You can screw up all that stuff. I am too. Like, I'm as broken or more than you are. Like, I'm not leaving. And regardless of, like, I said all those things, and then there were moments where, like, she would do something that was crazy hard for me and really, really difficult and so painful. And she was actually trying to do it to hurt me, but she was doing it to hurt me to make me go ahead and leave. Like, let me just hurt you, and then you can just go. I don't want to fall in love with you, hurt you, and then you bail, and then it breaks my heart. I can't do that again. And so I'd rather just be painful to you and hateful to you and mean to you so that you just do what you're going to do anyways and just leave before it hurts. And that's, I mean, for a year, that was our relationship. And a lot of that was long distance and really, really painful and really, really challenging. But I was just like, I'm just not leaving. Like, I'm just not going to leave. Like, I don't care if you want me to leave. I don't care if you end up dating another guy, which she did while, we were kind of going through a break, she says. I'm crazy, I don't know. But, we were doing all this stuff, and I was like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, you can, like, whatever you need to do to work out your stuff and your stuff. I know you come from pain. I promise. I'm not leaving. I'm just going to stick around until either you break and begin to love me, or you just bail on me and marry someone else. But I'm not going anywhere until the Lord just says, hey, this is done. She's actually married and has kids with somebody else. Like, it's actually done. And somewhere in the midst of that, we kind of came together under that when she realized, like, I really don't think he's leaving. Like, I think I could actually stab him in the neck. And he'd be like, I'm still here. I'm bleeding out, but I'm here. Like, and that was basically, and then we got married. No. But that was pretty much like, I mean, there's so much of that in our relationship. But for her, and the reason I tell this story is because she had a preconceived idea of what life with me was going to be like. She's like, you're going to be just like him. And you're going to get me to this point where I'm going to be very safe and feel very comfortable, and then it's going to be this great thing, and then all of a sudden you're going to bail hard, and it's going to crush me again, and I just can't do that. And regardless of what I showed her that was the opposite of that, showing her that I loved her sacrificially and I'm not going to go anywhere, I promise I'm not going to do that, regardless of that, she had this idea of like, this is what it's going to be like. This is who he is. And so regardless of what she saw to the opposite of that, she just kept moving forward with this idea that I'm going to crush her and break her heart one day, and then I'm going to leave her and abandon her. And that was a lot of our relationship until ultimately it shifted and changed. But the reason I tell that story is because of that piece of it. She had a preconceived idea of what a relationship with me was going to be like. And I believe in this room here, I believe that we have preconceived ideas of what God is like, preconceived things that were given to us by parents or by churches or by pastors or by the media or things like that, or by other things like, here's what God is like. And regardless of what we actually hear in the church or seeing on the screen or anything like that or hear from other people, like we just have this preconceived idea of like, here's what he's like, and there's really nothing that's going to change it. It's really hard to shake those preconceived ideas. And I see that so much in my experience, not only with adults, but especially with students and especially with people in my own family who just believe that God is really, really harsh. And if he were to talk with them, he would be very, very condescending. He'd be very, very judgmental. He would be very, very angry with them and disappointed with them. And if he were to speak to them, it'd mostly be like halfway mad all the time. And normally when I talk to students in small group or wherever, that's their experience too. They have this idea that they're so flawed that if God were to actually speak to them, it would be this thing where it's like he's very, very harsh in their minds. It's a preconceived idea that like he's perfect and I'm flawed, and therefore there's some issue there. And what it leads to is people kind of stiff-arming God. And I did this for a long time growing up. I didn't become a Christian until I was 17. But stiff-arming God and trying to keep him at a distance and go like, look, I don't know what you're like. I just know that you're probably like this. And so I want to keep you away from me because I think I know what you're like, and I don't want that breaking into my world. And normally what I've seen in the lives of students and adults, but in the lives of students specifically, is that normally they try and run away from God or keep God away from them or keep him at a distance based on what they think they know about him rather than what's actually true of him. And so they are distant from him, not because he's actually distant, but because they think he is a certain way, and that's how they see him, and that's how they perceive him, and all of those different things. And what that leaves us doing in many ways is like even people in the church that could say like John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, like we could quote those verses and it's talking about just sacrificial, pure love. We would sit there and say that verse and still, when we sin or something, we think that God, oh, he must be angry with us. He's still distant from us. He's still probably really harsh with me. Those verses where like the Apostle John says like, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. Like great love lavished on us, but then still, because we have this idea of what God is like, even a verse like that God loves us and is for us and not against us and wants to fight for us and not against us, all those different things, like even that, we still have this idea in the back of our minds somewhere that he's probably secretly angry with us somewhere, and if I screw up bad enough, he's going to punish me for my sins at some point in my life. And we just have this thing that's there. And so my point of bringing that up is I want to look at this passage because God reveals himself to Isaiah in a way that's really substantial, in a way that I think that would really help us. Because I think if we maintain our preconceived idea, our here's what I think you're like, if we hold on to that, I think we're going to miss out on things that are actually really, really wonderful. In the same way that Rainey, if she would have bailed on me, we would miss out on my son, Teddy. Like if she would have been like, I'm just going to hold on to this idea of Coleton. This is how he is. We never would have gotten married. We've never had 5 years of incredible marriage. And then having our son and bringing him into the world, we would have missed all of the beauty of that if she would have held on to this idea that this is who he is. One day he's going to try and break my heart, and I'm just not going to have it. If she had held on to that, we would have missed out on so many wonderful, wonderful things. And I think the same thing is true to all of us who are here, who, whether you believe in God or whatever you believe in God, I think if we hold on to a preconceived idea about who God is without allowing it to shift and to change, I think we'll miss out on an actual dynamic at play that's revealed in the Scriptures. We'll miss out on some wonderful, wonderful things because we'll think that he is one way when he's actually the other way. And then we'll keep him at a distance because I know what you're like, and actually it's like, no, you don't know what I'm like. You know nothing of what I'm like. You're staying away from me because you think I'm that way, but I'm not that way. I'm actually over here, but you refuse to see it. And so today I want to look at just 3 pictures of how God reveals himself and then how that should ultimately play out in our world, because I think a lot of what Isaiah goes through is what we go through. So picture number 1 is this. In verse, I believe it's verse 1, it says, picture number 1, in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah says, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. This is a really important and really probably a low moment for Isaiah, because it says in the year that King Uzziah died. King Uzziah was this really great king, and so he had ruled for about 52 years, and so probably he had been the king the entire life of Isaiah. So Isaiah had lived under King Uzziah his entire life. And so he gets to this point where King Uzziah dies, and King Uzziah was this incredible king. He made their military really strong with like really good weapons. He built up the cities and the walls of Jerusalem to make his city really secure. And so Isaiah had grown up in peace and prosperity, and everything is great, and no armies are invading, and everybody's good. The Lord is happy with us. God is for us, and really, really great stuff. And then when that man dies, all of a sudden it's like, well, now everything's shaken. This great man for 52 years, my entire life, now he's dead. And now everything is uncertain. Now chaos can come in. Now enemy nations are like, hey, we're ready to go. King Uzziah is dead. Now we can go and bust in there because the king is no longer there. And so for Isaiah, this is actually a pretty low time for him, a really substantial time of like, I don't know what's going to happen now. So it'd be like everything in your life, if all of a sudden your parents you've been, as long as you've lived, your parents are the way that they are, and then tomorrow it's like now everybody's gone and it's just you. And I was like, just figured out. Some of you are like, yay, that'd be great. But all of life would change, and that's what happens for Isaiah. All of life is now about to change. But it says that in that moment, it says in that year, in the year of probably his greatest fear that he's ever dealt with, it says that he saw the Lord high and lifted up, high and exalted. And the reason I think that's so substantial is that what the Lord does and what he could have done is he could have been like, Isaiah, you place too much hope and trust in this king. Like you thought this king was your peace. You thought this king was your security, and now he's dead. And you just, you know what, you put too much trust in him, and so you're on your own. But instead of that, God actually wants to meet him in his greatest fear and show him like, hey, here I am. I know that you're king. I know all your security is now dead, but here am I. And what he sees ultimately, the Lord reveals himself high and exalted, seated on a throne. And that's important because the king is no longer on his throne. He's not ruling anymore. And that scares Isaiah. Like, I don't have a king ruling on a throne anymore. And God's like, yes, you do. I'm still ruling on my throne. And so even if your king is dead and your security feels like, I don't know what life is going to be like now, trust me, I know what life is going to be like for you now because I'm still ruling. I still reign. These enemy nations didn't not attack you. You weren't kept safe because of that king sitting on his throne. You were kept safe because I'm always sitting on mine. This is how this works. Not this king, but I'm your king. I'm the one who's supposed to be the one that you look to and those types of things, the one that you find when you're struggling, the one that you find when you're anxious and you're scared and you're worried. Like, I'm supposed to be the one. And so God reveals him. I know that you're afraid, but look, I'm still sitting on my throne. I'm still in the temple. Actually, my robe fills the temple, which is, we could go into deeper explanation of that, but it's basically just saying, like, I'm still here, and I'm still in my temple. I'm still with you, and I'm still here. I'm with you here in the temple, and I'm still ruling from my throne. You're safe. And so in this moment, you get a picture of God trying to reveal to Isaiah, you're nervous about what life is going to be like. I just want to ease your fears. I want to give you peace. Here's who I am. I want to do this for you. I want to meet you in your greatest fear and actually bring you peace in this thing. And that's what he seeks to do in the life of Isaiah. And this makes sense. The other day, years ago, my son is 5 now, but when he was like, he started walking when he was like 10 months old because he's just like, awesome. And so he was walking really early, which actually caused a lot of danger because he could walk but not climb things, and he didn't really have balance because, he just learned to walk. So he's basically doing like this the entire time, trying to not fall and smash his face. But one time we were outside, and I'd built these benches where he liked to get over there and like hold up on them while he walked, and now he knows how to walk. And so then what he wanted to do is he wanted to climb up on them. And they were about, the top of them were, 4 feet off the ground or something like that, and he's like 1'2", really small. And so he would try and climb up on these things, and I'd have to go and pick him up and like, hey, man, don't do that, because if you fall, there's nothing but concrete on the ground here, and you'll smash your face, and it'll be really bad, and then we'll have to go to the hospital. And he's 10, 11 months old. He has no idea what I'm saying, but he's like, okay, yeah, that's great. And so that was basically, every time we took him outside, he tried to climb those things. And so for me, one day we were out there, and I was always trying to be vigilant and watch and make sure he's not climbing the thing. And I told him that over and over one day, like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I was doing something in the yard or something like that, and behind me, it just gets quiet, like too quiet for too long. And I was like, he's probably climbing that thing. And I look back, and he's not trying to climb it. He has climbed it, made it to the 4-foot top of the, where you put your back, made it to the 4-foot, and he's teetering like this. And dude, I just as fast as I could, just started running. I didn't have time to be like, no, like, what am I going to, there's nothing. I was just running at him. And all of a sudden, while I'm running, he starts to fall. And it's nothing but a 4-foot drop straight to the ground, and his tiny little head, could hit the ground and stuff like that. So I'm running and dive on concrete, skinning my arms and everything in my face. I'm like, ugh, and I catch him like that far from the ground. I was like, and he is like, he has no idea. Like, you could have died right there. Like, we would have been in the hospital. Like, your head was just, just hit the thing. Like, everything could have happened. You have no idea. You're like, why are you bleeding, Dad? I'm like, well, because he, like, what is wrong? I'm just so, and it was one of those things, like, I was like, I could have just, like, I have told you not to do this. I could have just been like, yo, man, fall. I would have been the worst parent in the whole world. But I love my kid. That's not what you do when you love somebody. You don't just be like, yo, man, just fall. Let's just see. I told you not to do it. Let's just see what happens. Like, no, that's not what you skin your arms. You do whatever it takes to get there before the disaster happens. Like, that's what you do. And I think there's so much of that that's here. Like, the Lord could have said to Isaiah, like, look, man, this is your fault. You're afraid because you put too much trust in a king. That's your fault. And it's on you. And instead of doing that, he gives him a vision of the kingdom. He gives him a vision of heaven. And it's like, hey, you're worried about a throne on earth. Look where I sit. I rule from here. Nothing down there is going to affect what I do up here. I still rule from here. I promise. Be at peace. Don't live in fear. This is where you're at. This is how safe you are. I still rule from here. And I think it's great that he could have thrown down condemnation, and instead he tries to give peace to Isaiah. And I think for you, I think the same thing is true. I think that's what he wants to do in your life specifically. I think in the year of your greatest struggle, he doesn't want to say like, well, you caused your own struggle. That's your fault. He doesn't want to do that. He actually wants to be like, in the year of your greatest struggle, he wants to reveal himself to you as a person who's like, I will walk you through this. I will be there with you. In the year that your sin came available and everybody got to see it in your family and it's the most shameful thing, what he wants to do is not sit there and be like, well, it sucks for you, man. I wouldn't have done that. I told you not to do those things. He doesn't want to do that. In the year of your greatest sin being revealed to all these people, like he actually wants to be there and go like, I will walk you out of this. I forgive you. There's no shame that's going to cover you. That's who he wants to be for you. In the year that you've lost all of your friends, he wants to be the one that actually shows you like, hey, I'll never leave. Like they may all leave, but I promise you, I want to reveal myself to you as someone who meets that need. They may leave, but I'll never leave. In the year where your life is turned upside down and it's chaotic and your family goes sideways and all those different things, he wants to be the one thing that actually remains secure forever, to constantly remind you like, hey, this is actually okay. I promise. I know it's hard, but this is who I am for you. I'm not going to sit there and look at your life and be like, sorry, that sucks for you. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do. What he wants to do is ultimately to meet that need and to show up in a way that makes you go like, I needed somebody, and he's like, please let me be that somebody. I want to be the one that actually shows up, skinning my arms, my legs, whatever it takes. I want to be the one that catches you before you hit the ground and fall. I'm never going to allow you just to sit and wallow in this pain. I'm here with you. I'm in the midst of it with you. This is who I am to you. And if our picture of God so often is that he's this one who's looking at us and we made a mistake and then it blows up in our face, and that he's in heaven going like, told you, I told you that was going to blow up in your face. If that's our picture of him, it's wrong. That is not what he's doing. When we weep, he weeps. When we're abandoned and we're sad and we're lonely, he's lonely with us, but he wants to be there near us. That's who he is. That's what a father does. To let my kid fall and smash his head onto the ground, I'm the worst father in the whole world, and I love my kid imperfectly. He loves you perfectly. He's not going to just do that. You may be experiencing pain, but he wants to meet you in that pain. That's who he is. That's the picture of him. He's not someone who has to sit there and tell you, I told you so. People who have to tell you, I told you so, have issues of insecurity. God's not insecure. He doesn't ever need to say, I told you so, because he's always right, and he knows that. He's not like, people who don't know that have to be like, see, I told you I was right. He doesn't have any of those issues. He's not worried about that. So he's never sitting there trying to rub your face in it. Oh, that hurt, didn't it? Yeah, I told you it would. He's never doing that. He's always going, that hurt, didn't it? I'm so sorry. Let's fix it together. And I think in the year of your hardest struggle, in the year of your deepest pain, in the year of whatever you're dealing with this year, in the year of COVID, in the year of where things just blew up, he's not sitting there going, well, told you. He's going, please let me join you in it. I want to reveal myself to you as someone who actually carries you out of it, walks you through it, stands with you in the midst of it. That's who I am. I'm going to love you through this thing. That's what he wants to be. He wants, if everybody else leaves, he wants to be the one that's sitting there going like, I'll give my arms and legs for this. I'll give my life for this. I'll give my life for you. I want to be with you in it. That's who he tries to reveal himself to Isaiah. Yes, you shouldn't have been worried. Yes, prophet of Israel, you should have known that God was going to take care of you, and you didn't. But that's okay. Let me reveal to you that I'm still ruling from a throne. So that's the first picture. The second one. Second picture, verse 5. Isaiah says, woe to me. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. This is a really substantial moment where Isaiah realizes how sinful he is. That's why he's saying, woe to me, I'm ruined. And it's a really important thing. There's a couple things that I really want to point out here. One is that notice that the Lord doesn't call out Isaiah's sin. Like, it's not like God's like, hey, Isaiah, you're really dirty, bro. And your lips, like, no. Like, the Lord doesn't say anything here to make Isaiah. But the reason is like, who really loves a person that's constantly pointing out your flaws? Like, hey, you did really good, but. Like, yo, man, take your butts and shove it. Like, I don't want to hear any of that. Like, that's not what the Lord does. That's not what he wants to do. He's not constantly sitting there like, hey, this is wrong, and that's wrong, and this is wrong, and now spin around, okay, and now that, and this, and now, he's not, Jesus didn't do that with his disciples. Like, hey, man, if he did, he never would have gotten around to healing anybody. He'd be like, everybody's wrong. All this stuff is wrong. Like, he never would have done that. And we hate people who do that. He knows that. And so he says nothing to Isaiah. Isaiah realizes that he's sinful and that he's imperfect because he's standing beside and seeing perfection. He sees perfection and realizes, oh dear, I'm not perfect. Like last week I was working out with Dakota Zook, one of the pastors who used to work here, and when I work out next to him, I'm pretty strong. I feel very strong most days, feel really good, very in shape. I work out next to him and I'm like, I am a piece of garbage. Like, he is so strong and so fast and so athletic. Like, when I work out with him, if I work out next to other people, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty great. I work out next to him, and all of a sudden, all of my flaws are very visible because he's going faster than me, lifting more than me, and it makes me want to punch him sometimes. Like, it's just very, very visible. And so you guys experience this to some extent when you look at Instagram. You're like, oh, she looks like this, or he does this. All of a sudden, what you're able to see, you don't see the beauty, you actually see the flaws in yourself. Well, some of that is taking place here just without the shame. What Isaiah sees while he's standing next to perfection is he sees his imperfections, but the Lord doesn't have to point those things out. He's not constantly fact-finding for you and telling you how wrong you are. That's not what he's doing. The second thing that I think is important is that notice where Isaiah is. Because this is for us. Many of you, I've heard this conversation, and y'all have talked to me about this, and you've been at this point where you like confessing your sin, and you're dealing with your sin, and you're convicted by it, and you feel very, very far away from the Lord. And it's like, I'm overwhelmed by it. I wish that I was closer to him. I have this sin in my life, and I'm convicted by it, and I feel like I'm slipping back, I'm falling away. I wish I were closer to him. But notice where Isaiah actually comes to grip with his sin and why he does. He doesn't come to grips and understand that he's a sinner because he's far away from the Lord. He comes to grips and understands that he's a sinner because he's closer to the Lord than he's ever been in his entire life. That's where he understands how sinful he is. And so if you're sitting there and going like, I'm just overwhelmed by some of the sins in my life, I can't believe I'm seeing these things for the first time, I wish I was closer to the Lord, Isaiah would testify that like, actually in that time, you're closer to him than you've probably ever been. Because that's what happens when you're around perfection. That's what happens when you're near him. Things are pointed out and things are shown to you, and the sin that you wish weren't there, it just gets shown to you. It's not because you're far away. It's because you're very, very near. And that's so important because it releases us of the shame or the guilt or like, I just think I'm really far away. And Isaiah would say, actually, I noticed my most substantial issues when I was really close to him, not when I was really, really far away. And so the point of the Lord allowing conviction to take place is not to show us how far away we are, but to show us that like, hey, the Spirit is doing work here, and he wants to set us free. And so that's what he's doing in the light of what Isaiah is experiencing here. He's actually revealing those things for him so that they could ultimately come to this third picture. The third picture is of God's forgiveness. God ultimately forgives him. Isaiah, I'm going to keep these things together as well. Starting in verse 5, he says, "Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined from a man of unclean lips and live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar because that sucker was hot. When he touched my mouth with it and said, 'See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for.'" The reason I kept those things together, I know I already read verse 5, but it's important for you to see these two things right beside each other. He says, "Woe to me, I'm unclean, I'm undone, I'm ruined because of my sin." And then immediately it's like, then someone came and found a way to forgive my sin. Like as soon as Isaiah recognized that he was sinful, God made a way for his sin to be forgiven. Like immediately. And you need to see it and read it like that. It wasn't like, I'm undone, and then he says, "Woe to me, I'm undone, I'm a man of unclean lips. God, would you please forgive me?" There's none of that. As soon as he recognizes his sinfulness, God makes a way for his sin to be forgiven. And that's what he's like. And the reason he does that is because that's all he wants to do with sin. He doesn't want to take your sin that you feel, or that you see, that you confess or anything. He doesn't want to take that and show it to you and be like, "Yeah, that's gross, isn't it? Man, I'd really not do that if I were you." He doesn't want to judge you by it or throw it in your face or do anything. He just wants to forgive sin. And so immediately, "Woe to me, I'm unclean. Let me find a way to forgive you." And he does this thing with the seraphim and the live coal and all the rest of it. But the reason he does that is because he wants to forgive sin. That's what he wants to do. If you read in the Gospels of what Jesus does to sinful people, he's constantly forgiving them. He's constantly near them and then forgiving them. That's what he does with sinners. That's what he does with sin. He just wants to forgive it. This is why Jesus came. He wants to forgive it. The second reason that God does this ultimately is because Isaiah is pulling away from the Lord here. When he's going, "Woe to me, I'm unclean. Woe to me, I'm undone. Woe to me, I'm sinful, and get away from me. I shouldn't be here." He's actually trying to get away from the Lord, and the Lord doesn't want him to get away. In the same way that he doesn't want you to get away. He doesn't want you to find distance between yourselves. He doesn't want you to try and run and hide. He doesn't want you to try and do any of those things. He actually wants to draw near to you. And so immediately when Isaiah seeks to go run and hide, he's like, we got to find a way to fix this so that he won't run and hide, but so that we can be close together, so that we can actually be near. This is what he does immediately, and this is what he wants to do for us. It's a problem that Isaiah can't fix. And as soon as he realizes it's there, he's like, "I'm going to fix it for you. This is what I want to do for you." And so if you're ever in your sin and you're sitting there and you're going like, "I feel like I'm far away from the Lord," and then you realize some of your sin and you want to get away from him, what he's actually trying to do is to get close to you in the midst of that. He wants you to draw near. He wants to draw near to you. He wants to forgive those things. He wants that to actually be your experience, to experience the conviction of sin, and then ultimately to have made a way so that you can be near him even in the midst of that. And this is why, again, This is why we celebrate what takes place this weekend. This is why we celebrate Easter. This is why we celebrate what Jesus did. Jesus was that way. This is what he did in order to, we realize our sinfulness and he's able to draw near. Jesus was the way in order for us to draw near so that he could take away our sins so that we can actually be drawn near to the Lord. This has always been his process. This has always been what he's about. You experience that you're sinful and I'm going to make a way for it to go away. You try and run away from me and I'm going to pursue you so that we can actually be near. And so in your life, if you're dealing with sin, and all of a sudden you're thinking like, well, maybe I'm really far away from the Lord, know the fact that like Isaiah would say, no, you're actually probably very close to him if you're recognizing that. The opposite is actually true. If you feel like I'm crushing it, I'm doing really, really well, and I don't think I have any sin in my life, John talks about that. He's like, if you think that you don't sin, you're far worse off than anybody else. But the people who recognize that they're sinners and that they have sin in their lives are not people that God is trying to get away from. It's people he's trying to draw near to. This is why he was called a friend of sinners, a friend of sinners. And so for us, among these three things, I think that in so many ways, what we deal with when our vision of God is one that he's either crazy judgmental and crazy angry at our sin. And sin, yes, he's got holiness, and it's something that's kind of unexplainable and very, very difficult. But the way that he constantly looks at your sin is like, I want to take it away. I want to forgive it so that we can be close. I don't want to hold it in front of your face. I don't want to judge you by it. I just want to take it away so that we can actually have a relationship. I want to reveal to you a picture of myself that's far more beautiful and far more higher than anything that you can possibly imagine, because I want you to know that this is actually who I am, not this. So I want to read something real fast of a story. It actually shapes up very similar to kind of how this girl that has this preconceived idea of what God is going to be like, and then how those walls kind of begin breaking down. And then I want to ask some questions. But this is from a book called Blue Like Jazz, which I encourage all of you to read. Blue Like Jazz, really great book. And it's rather long, but I'm going to try and go through it pretty fast. But this story is told by a man named Don, who wrote the book. And it's about a girl named Penny who's in college at Reed College out in Portland. But this is what Penny says. She goes, I wanted nothing to do with religion. My perception of Christians was that they were narrow-minded people, politically conservative, and hypocritical. I also felt that Jesus wouldn't like me if we met. But then at college, I met Nadine. Nadine and I would sit for hours in a room. Mostly we would talk about boys or school, but always by the end of it, we talked about God. The thing I loved about Nadine was that I never felt like she was selling anything. She would talk about God as if she knew him, as if she had talked to him on the phone that day. I came to realize that I had judged all Christians on the personalities of a few. That was frightening to me because it had been easier to just dismiss Christians as nuts. Been there. But here was Nadine. I didn't have a category for Nadine. To her, God was a being in which she interacted. And even more, Nadine believed that God actually liked her. I thought that was beautiful. She asked me if I wanted to read through the book of Matthew, and in fact, I did. I wanted to see if this Jesus thing was real. I still had serious issues with Jesus, though only because I associated him with Christianity, and there was no way I would ever call myself a Christian. But I figured I should see for myself, so I told her yes. We would eat chocolates and smoke cigarettes and read the Bible, which is the only way to do it if you ask me. The Bible is so good with chocolate. I always thought the Bible was more of a salad thing, but it isn't. It's a chocolate thing. We started reading through Matthew, and I thought it was all very interesting. And I found Jesus very disturbing and very straightforward. He wasn't diplomatic, and yet I felt like if I met him, he would really like me. I can't explain how freeing that was to realize that if I met Jesus, he would like me. I never felt like that about some Christians. I always thought that they would yell at me. But it wasn't like that with Jesus. There were people he loved and people he got really mad at. And I kept identifying with the people that he loved, which was really good because they were all broken people, the kind of people who were tired of life and want to be done with it. They were desperate people who were outcasts and people who were pagans. But listen, this is the best part. We got to the part in the book where Jesus starts talking about the soil. There's this part in Matthew where Jesus talks about soil, and he's going to throw some seed on the soil, and some of the seed is going to grow because it's good soil, and some of the seed isn't because it fell on rocks and the soil wasn't as good. And when I heard that, everything in me leapt up, and I wanted so bad to be the good soil. That is all I wanted, to be good soil. I was like, Jesus, please let me be good soil. And Don speaks. So is that when you became a Christian? No, that was later. So what happened next? Don asked. Well, later that month, there was a raging party going on downstairs in the dorm, and I was pretty drunk and high, and I wasn't feeling too well, so I started up the stairs to see if my friend Naomi was in her room, and she wasn't. So I went down to my room and sort of crashed on the floor and just sort of lay there for a little while, and then it happened. Now, you promised to believe me. Promise what? Don asked. Penny stopped walking and put her hands in her coat pockets. Okay, but I'm not crazy. She took a deep breath. I heard God speak to me. And Speak to you, I questioned. Yes. Well, what did he say? He said, Penny, I have a better life for you, not only now, but forever. And when Penny said this, she put her hand over her mouth as if that would stop her from crying. Really? I said, God said that to you. Yes, Penny talked through her hand. Do you believe me? I guess. Says, it doesn't matter if you believe me or not. Penny started walking in. That is what happened. It was crazy. God said it. I got really freaked out about it. I thought maybe it was the drugs, but I knew that at the same time it wasn't the drugs. Penny put her hand on her forehead and smiled, shaking her head. I should read you my journal from that night. I was like, oh my God, God is talking to me. I'm having this trippy God thing right now. God is talking to me. And so Don asked, so is that when you became a Christian, the night that God talked to you? No. You didn't become a Christian even after God talked to you? No. Why? I was drunk and high, Don. You should be sober when you make important life decisions. That's a good point, I agreed. But I still thought that she was crazy. So what happened next? She said, well, a couple of nights later, I got on my knees and said I didn't want to be like this anymore. I'd already come to believe that Jesus was who he said he was, that Jesus was God. I don't know how I came to that conclusion. It wasn't like doing math. It was just something entirely different, but I knew it. I knew inside that he was God. But this time I just prayed and asked God to forgive me, and that is when I became a Christian. The reason I love that story, one, is because she says that you should read the Bible while eating chocolate and smoking cigs. It's just interesting to me that, like, this girl who grew up, the story of her life was like growing up a hippie in the Northwest and just nothing to do with religion or anything like that. This girl had so many preconceived ideas of what God was like, and then she read the Bible. Like, she just read Matthew, and like, let me just meet Jesus. Let me just meet him and see what he's like. And what she realized, she's like, all these people that have told me what Jesus is like, he's nothing like that. All these people who have told me, like, you need to do this, and you got to make sure you do this, and you got to do this, and you got to look like us and talk like us and be like us, and then God will love you. Then she reads the Gospels, and she's like, I think he loves me as broken as I am. The only people he seems to really identify with the most and spend the most time with are the broken people just like me. Like, I am so screwed up, and he seems to love the screw-ups. I'm so sinful and rebellious, and he seems to only want to spend time with sinful and rebellious people. Like, it blew her mind. That, like, and somebody was like, no one has told me this. No one has said to me that this is what Jesus is like. No one has given me this picture of God that he's like, I just love you completely, and I want you to know me deeply. What they had heard was like, you got to dress like this, talk like this, don't do this, make sure you believe all these things. None of that. She read and met Jesus, and it was like, he's nothing like what they've told me that he is. And I want to know this man. I want to know this king. I want to know this Savior. And all of those preconceived ideas came under the microscope as she read the scriptures. And she was like, I don't think this, what I thought about Jesus, I realized that's not true. What I thought about Jesus, I realized that's not true, because this is who he reveals himself to be. And so for you, what I want for you is to ultimately do that. I want you to question your view of God. Because if you're sitting there and your view of God is keeping you away from him, I promise you it's wrong. If your view of God is making you feel like I don't want to be near him, I promise you it's wrong. The reason I worship with my hands raised or sometimes on my knees is not because I'm trying to show off. It's because, like, I have a picture of him that you're worthy of everything I got. Anything that I can give you, I just want to give you all. Like, you've done so much for me. You've saved my life. You've given me a marriage. You've given me a son. Like, all of it. You can have it all. And it's that kind of thing. Of like, I'm not doing it to show off or anything like that. But like, everything I got. And so, if you have a picture of him that is different than mine, that's fine. But if you have a picture of him that makes you want to stay away from him, I promise you it's not right. It's a wrong picture. I promise you, if you have a view of God that like makes you think that he hates you, I promise you that's the enemy, that's not him. That's wrong. He loves you. He died. No one dies to show their love for you unless they actually love you. Like it's in the words, it's in the whole thing. He loves you, and he wants to know you. And yes, there are things about following him that he definitely wants to call you into, but more than anything, he just wants you to meet him so that you can actually get to know this is what he actually looks like, so that I'm not running away. Actually, what he would say to you is like, some of the views you have of me, you're running away from me because of those. That's great. Run away from those views. I'm nothing like that. Run away from those views of me, and then maybe you'll start running towards me. I want you to come this way. This is who I am. I'm not over here. These things that you have, these views you have of me, that's just not who I am. I'm over here. But see me for as I am. See me for who I am. See me for what I actually say to you and want from you and love about you. I'm not someone that you should keep at a distance. I'm someone that wants to draw close, and you should want to draw close to me, because everything you long for, I promise I have in store to give you. That's who he is. And so in your small groups, in your time, Lord, as you read chocolate and read the Bible, go ham. I want you to actually just take your view of who God you think that he is, and I just want you to question it. Put the questions on the screen. Question these things right here. Where did you get your view of God? Where did you get it? Was it from your parents? Was it from some church? Was it some pastors? Like, question that. Where did you actually receive it? Where are those things coming from? Why do you feel that he's actually that way? Is it because that's just how you feel, or you actually read it in the scriptures? Is it true? And that's the most important one. Do you have this view of God that you're holding in your mind that you think he's like this? That's not actually true, because if it's not true, you don't like it anyways. I wish God wasn't like this, and if you find out it's false, then you can be like, great, I hated that view altogether. Question what you actually, because if you view him in a way, I promise you, if you view him in a way that's making you go like, I don't want to be near him, I promise you, you're viewing him incorrectly. Father, would you help us to do that? I'm grateful that this weekend testifies to your great love for us. I'm grateful that your desire for us led you to pursue us, even in your death, to your death, to pursue us. God, I pray that you would bless the conversations with small group leaders and in our small groups. God, I pray that those of us who have strongholds built up or views of you that are wrong, God, I pray that you would expose those things, that we would see you as you are. In Jesus' name, amen.